Hello and welcome to Nale Yoga. I'm Ruthie Eisenberg, and today we are speaking with the soulful and mystical Jenna Zadaka. I'm so excited to have her on the show. Jenna is a real pioneer in Jewish yoga and women's embodiment and empowerment. She's the creator of a Breath and Soul, a Jewish-rooted healing practice that blends yoga, mysticism, and somatic wisdom into a sacred path towards transformation. She's a guide for women waking up to their bodies, their roots, and their radiance. And her teachings weave together really beautifully deep breath work, Jewish embodiment, Kabbalah, yoga, and the subtle magic of inner stillness. Today, we're diving into a theme that's near and dear to both of our hearts: Jewish yoga and healing, how rest becomes revelation, how breath becomes our prayer, and how sacred presence can return us to ourselves. So, with that, welcome Jenna to the podcast.
Hi, Ruthie. So honored to be here.
Yeah, it's a real honor to have you here. And I have to say that I've done some of your yoga YouTube videos, and they're just fantastic. Just love like the sequences and the energy and the music and the Jewish components. Really, really beautiful work that you've been doing.
Thank you. It's so nice to hear.
Yeah. So let's just jump right in, and maybe we can start with you sharing about how you got into weaving together these two worlds of the yoga and Jewish spirituality, how that's evolved for you over time.
Yeah, well, my journey started with yoga and meditation before I really entered the realm of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah and connection to source. And as I really dove into yoga and meditation, eventually I just felt like there was a piece missing for me, and I hadn't fully arrived home yet until I really started exploring my own treasure chest of gems, which was the Torah. And once I dove into Torah Judaism and mystical Judaism, I left the yoga behind and, in a way, left my body behind to kind of ascend into this spiritual world, which I think is common for many Bali Chuba or people who are new to the the ways of the tradition. And there comes a time where you have to integrate both. And my body was calling. The integration was just a necessary step in my journey. And so I would say I started to lift my body into my spiritual practice. And of course, the journey is never ending and continuous because being a soul in a body, there's a natural struggle. They're dual opposites. We have our soul that's always ascending upwards like a flame. And then we have the body like the wick of a candle that's always gravitating downwards. And for the most part, there's a lot of disharmony and difficulty merging the two. And then there's those beautiful flowy moments of a harmonious union, a yichud, or a unification of soul and body. And that's the best feeling possible. And that's part of our mission and what we're striving for as souls in bodies.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And it's so amazing because you're talking about this union between the body and soul, because that is the definition of the word yoga. We know in Sanskrit, yoga means union. And what a beautiful way to unite the body and the soul and also unite yoga together with Judaism. I love it. Actually, for me, it was a little bit the opposite. I was first Baal Tshuva, immersed in the Jewish traditions. And at some point, I started feeling really disembodied with the Jewish way and feeling like I'm doing these things and going through the motions, but not really feeling that fire and that spark. So things were feeling kind of gray and dull. And practicing yoga and learning more about spirituality, connecting more with the body, actually helped me to come back and bring that Jewish flame back to life so much stronger and really enjoy practicing Judaism and walking the Jewish path because that's what I want to be doing and not because I have to. So I completely resonate with what you're saying and this wonderful combination of walking both the yoga and the Judaism way. And I'm curious, what would you say to someone who is from the Jewish traditions who might not be familiar with yoga at all, or might be suspicious or apprehensive about yoga, or have some preconceived biases against yoga? Do you ever encounter that?
Yeah, and I would say, firstly, it's not for everyone. It is one of many, many embodiment practices that can be explored as a way to come home to yourself and get comfortable in knowing yourself. Um, so it in terms of the tree of life, I think of yoga as more on the side of Gavura. There's certain postures, there's a sequence, you're in the four corners of your mat, there's alignment and discipline, and um, of course, we incorporate free flowing movement and some chesed and some authentic movement. I would say yoga is more of a Gavura practice, and that's not always for everyone. So if you explore it and it's just not for you, it's not the only way to get into your body. There's many forms of movement and embodied prayer. And I think it's about exploring what is the right expression for you. Also, if you're new to yoga and you go to one class with one teacher and it doesn't speak to you, it could be a multitude of reasons. It could be you want to explore another form of yoga because there's so many types of yoga. There's so many types of teachers and facilitators, and usually it comes down to finding the right setting where you feel safe to relax into your body.
Yeah, there's so many types of yoga and so many different teachers and yoga styles. And, even as we're talking right now about correlating yoga with the Sfirot, and especially the Sfira of Gvura, it's interesting because I'm just starting to think right now about the different types of yoga and what different Sfirot they may correlate with. Like Ashtanga yoga definitely feels like Gvura, but something like somatic yoga maybe can be a little bit more on the chesed side, or maybe tiferet because it's more about how you feel on the inside and not so much what the posture looks like aesthetically on the outside. So that's a really interesting way of framing it. I haven't thought of that before. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about yoga as embodied prayer. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so think about if you are if you visualize the Magen David or the Star of David, there's kind of a multitude of directionalities. There is the up and down, which we are often used to in our Jewish practice, up and down, like ascending to spiritual heights, sending our prayers up, um, our angels moving up the ladder, so to speak, to the higher heavens, to higher source, and then there's coming down, which is like physicality, earthiness, what is real, what is present in this body. There's the up and down, which we're so familiar with in our life. But there's also in the Magen David, which is a symbol of universal Judaism and just spirituality and for the world. There's also the quality of in and out. If you can picture, there's a direction that goes inwards, coming into our center, coming into our truth. And then there's the direction of outwards, of expanding beyond the self into new heights, into energies that surround us, kind of opening our ability to touch realms beyond the skin and beyond our limited sense of self. And so this in and out dynamic we explore in yoga, in embodied prayer, and up and down. And I think in our prayer book and in our current state of prayer, we're often in a very linear mindset of like front back mentality. And so embodiment opens us up to all directions of divine space, that we can actually receive wisdom and divinity from all directions, and inside, outside, up, down, diagonal. And as we get more in touch with that, we open ourselves to receive more of life.
That's such a great symbol for conceptualizing embodiment with the Star of David. It's also interesting you mention it because the six-pointed star is also the symbol for the energetic center of the heart in yoga, the Anahata chakra. And it's, I love finding when we have these connections between yoga and Judaism, even through these pictorial symbols. So when you're talking about prayer in this multidimensional way, it's also connected to the heart and it's coming from the heart, but also encompasses the whole body. And what an amazing way to experience that.
Yeah, and if we think about the tree of life with the spherotic energies, the very center is Tiferet, which is the harmony of the heart, the balance that is in the heart, but also in the whole torso. It's like the trunk of the tree. It's the core of who we are. And ultimately, prayer is about expanding from that place and re-entering and returning to that place.
Yes, yes, yes. So let me shift gears for a second and talk about your healing practices. And what do you see as needing to be healed the most? You work with a lot of women. So, what do you see about their bodies? What do you notice about their nervous systems? What are the areas that you think are calling for the most healing, especially as we, frame it through the tree of life perspective?
It's a beautiful question. And I see every single person as so unique and coming with their own journey of healing. And what is so special about using tree of life healing and energy is that it embraces the wholeness of who we are. And it takes into account all the energetics from the head to the heart to the liver and instinctual body, sexual energies. So when we're exploring the tree of life in my embodiment courses, every woman comes through a different angle. And I think within the first class or two, people already know where they're out of alignment. It becomes clear to them. And so much of the tree of life is coming into balance, coming into our center column. So we spoke about Tiferet being the heart and the torso, and there's also Yesod in the center column, and ultimately Malchut in the center column. So I really think the whole journey is about enlivening the center column, like a channel of fluid openness, that is what's going to allow healing. And everyone comes from a different angle and from a different place that needs refinement, that needs focus, that needs awareness. And ultimately, the whole journey of the tree of life is to widen our vessel to receive more shefa, more blessing, more life force, more of everything. And Malchut is our ability to expand ourselves and encompass more of who we are. So, a really personal journey, and it's also a collective journey because we're like one body. At the end of the day, the collective consciousness is like one body, as our sages teach. And some of us may be more in Gevura, more in strength and power, but possibly they need to come into chesed, more openness, fluidity, generosity. And some people are really depleted in the realm of chesed and loving kindness, and they're giving so much that they're depleted. They need some more structure and alignment and strength. And so we're all on this path of finding our center and our heart, our harmony. And Teferet means a heartful presence. So it's being present with what is, and what is alive in us. So your question is really beautiful. And I would say everyone comes through their healing in their own path. And I love my role of being able to witness and create a sacred container for them to do their own journey work.
Yeah, it's so special that you do that. And I just love looking at it from the perspective of just creating that container and merging towards the central column and really balancing out the energies. Um, I have to ask you, it makes me think of how we have in Judaism and Kabbalah, we have the Sfirot. And in the yoga system, classically, we have the chakras. There's the 7 chakras, and then there's also the 8th chakra and a whole lot of other chakras that are this interconnected network. So I'm curious what you have to say um, about the intersection between the chakras and the sfirot. They're all energetic centers, and a lot of times I've seen people try to align them and fit them together into one system. But to me, it's kind of like trying to fit together a square and a circle. Yes, there's some overlap, but they're not exactly aligned. And there's some key differences in the actual centers themselves. The chakras are one column and they branch out. The sfirot are more three-dimensional. So I'm curious, what is your perspective on this?
Yeah, I would agree that they are different modalities and they're both pathways into our subtle body, our subtle energetic system. And so it doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. They're just different pathways in. Personally, I find the Sphero as a more dynamic system and more ways to connect. They're so multi-dimensional. Um, in my course, we explore each sphera has an element and an archetype and a directionality in the sacred cube. Yes, a place in the body, but also they represent Sipur, the story of how the divine enters and animates the world. And what really disheartens me and makes me a little sad is so many Jews that are using the chakras but have no idea about the Sphirot system. And I've been invited to yoga at synagogues like Shabbat yoga using using the chakras, or like holiday, Hag yoga using the chakras. And my dream is that we can use our own treasure chest of mystical embodiment tools, and that one day it will be just as universal as the chakras. And it's something that I see as so universal that it's not just for Jews, but it's for the whole world to discover God in their body and to find healing and balance in their body. And so that's my dream. And I'm not saying that chakras are less than. The common person these days at any yoga studio knows the chakras, but Jewish people themselves don't even know the sphirot. And I'd love to start to awaken that into the collective
Yeah,
consciousness.
that is so important what you're saying because it's not like one is better than the other. They're just different access pathways from originating from different traditions. And I really have so much respect for the depth of the chakra system. And at the same time, I completely agree with you that we have this treasure chest of a system in Judaism with the Sfirot that is, by and large, pretty untapped into. And it holds so much potential. And that's actually one of the reasons why this podcast was started to begin with. And one of the series on here is the Kabbalistic Sfirot series with guided yoga nidra practices because there's so many series with chakra yoga nidra practices. And they're really well done and they're really beautiful meditations. And yet, for me, it just I wanted something that speaks more to my Jewish neshama and to the Jewish soul. So, if it's not out there, we're the ones that have to create it. And so, I'm just really grateful to you for bringing the tree of life out there and showing the depth and the beauty and dimensionality of Kabbalah in such a soulful way and in such an embodied way. And also in such a deep way, too, because many times we see it taught more at a more superficial level. But like you're saying, there's really so much depth to it.
Yeah. And I'd love to speak about what you're saying, that there are a lot of sphirot taught in a superficial level. I've also seen most of the spherotic teachings are coming from the masculine perspective. And what I would love to revive is the tree of life from a feminine, embodied, earth based perspective. Even books, and I've read so many books by women on the sphirot, even those are coming from a top down masculine directionality. And so I really find my part of my mission and my passion is to teach it from the inside out and from below to above. And back to that Magen David example, if you think about the Magen David, there's two triangles. There's a triangle that has the base at the bottom and lifts upwards. And then there's the triangle that has the wide base towards the sky and then the peak going downwards. And this speaks to the two directionalities, the masculine direction of light and the feminine direction of light. And in Kabbalah, this is known as Or Yashar, like a downward flowing masculine solar light that comes down, kind of like heaven to earth or our mind to our body. And that has been so stressed since rabbinic Judaism began. And unfortunately, the bottom up perspective, which is more earth to body and body up to heart and heart up to mind and mind up to crown or root to crown, that direction has been largely ignored for a lot of our history. And now that the feminine is really being infused in the learning and in the practice of Kabbalah, we get to bring in this dimension that's always been there. It's just been quiet. especially because Kabbalah is the feminine aspect of Torah. It literally means to receive. It is the feminine dimension of Torah, and yet it's been taught by men for most of history, and this is our time of reviving from the body and upwards.
Yes, thank you so much for saying that. And I really want to talk more about this embodied perspective for Jewish spirituality from a more feminine perspective, which has been largely ignored and sidelined. So it's interesting also because the chakras are taught from the ground up traditionally, starting from the root chakra and the energy that's coiled there around the perineum, then ascends and rises up the chakra column all the way to the crown chakra and beyond. And so it rises from the ground up. And then in Judaism, like you're saying, the sfirot are taught more from a top down perspective. So I'm curious to hear more what you have to say on that. I know there's been different explanations for why the chakras go this way, but I'm really curious to hear more about this feminine ground up perspective to Kabbalah and the Sfirot.
Yeah, well, firstly, I want to say that the Sphirot are not just top down. They've been taught mostly from Keter to Malchut, but they flow in both directions as well as right and left. And if you look at the lines between all of them, there's the graph, the diagram that we often see have like circles, which are the pools of vitality, the kind of concentrated energy of the Sphirot. They also have the lines that connect them all in different directions. So we do have an upward and outwards, we have a downwards and inwards, but most of the texts have been, because it's coming from a masculine perspective, from Keter to Malchut. But in and I there are moments for that, and there's importance for that, and there's also interesting opening when we explore from the other direction. And so in my course, The Radiant Body, the Embodied Kabbalah, we do work with both directions depending on what type of energy you need that day, or what are you trying to lift something up. There's an arousal from below, as Kabbalah explains it. It's like the feminine waters that are aroused first from below, or are we bringing in an arousal from above, like a downpour of wisdom from above? We see this in Ezekiel's prophecy when he saw the Hayot, the angels, running up and down the Yaakov's ladder. Well, we see it in Yaakov's ladder also, but with Ezekiel's vision, we see the Hayot running up and down like flashes of lightning. And this concept is known as ratzo veshuv, running and returning, running and returning. And so we're in a constant state of oscillation between rising upwards and then returning to what is and coming back down below. And I'm not saying that one direction is better, that the feminine is better. It's just to come into harmony, like the Magen David, there's an equal triangle that goes up and an equal triangle that goes down. And most of that space is overlapped. The triangles are overlapped. So most of it is harmonious. And sometimes we need more of one or more of the other to come into a wholesome balance.
Yeah, exactly. There has to be that dynamic and that dance. And when we have too much of one or too much of the other, that's when things fall out of balance. And that's when dis-ease arises or symptoms arise, whether they're in the physical body or in the relationship or in the collective world consciousness, when we have these imbalances of the masculine and the feminine energies.
Yeah, and I can give a clear example from my own life, because I know this has been very hypothetical and very like visual. But just a clear example is there are times that we all look for escapism. And sometimes escapism looks unhealthy, like alcohol or drugs or partying, but escapism can also be disguised in holiness, like learning Torah um, praying, and all of these, and that sometimes we are using spirituality to escape what is and to escape discomfort or unease. And it's easier, say, to turn to a book and learn something than be present with the issue that is right in front of you, that is interpersonal, or that is your child, or that is your spouse. And it's easier to escape. So I find myself, especially for many years when I was getting into mystical Judaism, the escapism was disguised as learning Kabbalah and praying and going to Sfat for like for es- for the sake of kind of coming out of issues. And then there's a point of time when my body was like, let's face what is and let's work here and be present with what actually needs a tikkun in your life. And that's the downward triangle. Sometimes it's more uncomfortable to come into your body and be with discomfort or be with the issue that is part of your path of healing right here. And the other extreme is we're so much in our body and we never connect to divine, or we never get out of our kind of laziness or slump of our impulse of the body. We could be overly obsessed with our body, and then we need a little ascension. We need a little inspiration. I think the purpose is being honest with yourself.
Yeah, I like that. And I really resonate with what you're saying too on a personal level, because for me it's so easy to just bask in these higher realms and meditate and do yoga and do all the creative stuff. And when it comes to things like housework or, floors or dishes, all of that more concrete stuff, it's a challenge and it doesn't come so naturally. So sometimes I find myself wanting to, escape sometimes into studying or meditation. But the honest part of me knows that it's just to avoid folding laundry. And so it's something that I've been working on, getting myself more grounded and more earthed um in the more like earthy plane, and having that balance where there's really space for both, and it's always a work in progress.
I think culturally, that's why our tradition has been so upward facing, because unfortunately, the mundane housework, child rearing wasn't as glamorous, wasn't as valued or respected as scholars. And that's why the upward facing triangle got so much attention. And yet, if you look at our ancestors, they found moments of connection throughout. They prayed while they were making dough. They had special customs around childbirth and rituals to make their housework and their community and their family life meaningful. But that wasn't recorded in a lot of our books, and a lot of that wisdom was lost. Actually, Tirza Firestone speaks a lot about this in her book called The Receiving, about the lost feminine wisdom that just wasn't recorded because it wasn't respected. And so it's up to us to find what's true in our life, because one is not necessarily better than the other.
Yeah, and what you're saying makes me also think even of our priests, our Kohanim. They were in the loftiest, most respected position. And what was their jobs? their job was, taking care of the physical details of the temple. So very earthy, very concrete. And that's in some ways the most spiritual kind of work there is, bridging that spiritual and the physical. So we have these bridges, and especially for women, I think it's so important to that we're raising the sparks and bringing divinity into the mundane. And this is the essence of what Kabbalah teaches us. It's the essence of what Judaism is about, merging these higher and these lower realms. And we can find, the spiritual in the physical and the divine in the most earthy, concrete details of life. We can find the divine in the dishes and in the laundry, you know? So let me ask you about I think this might be a good place to transition to talking a little bit more about the role of rest. Rest is a space for receiving, a space for not doing. And I would love if you could speak a little bit about your perspective on rest in Judaism and Kabbalah.
Yeah, well, when you said rest, my first thought goes towards the sphera of Malchut, which is the uniquely feminine sphera in the tree of life that rests on the typical diagram at the bottom of the tree of life, and it is the open, receiving vessel. And what's really interesting is Malchut is silent, whereas all the other sphirot are connected to sound and have a specific force or charge of energy. Malchut is the empty, silent sphera. And you can think about Malchut as the bottom of the tree. You can also think about it as the quiet center channel that integrates from all the energies. There's another system of the sphero being kind of a divine cube around us. And while all the sphero are wrapped around us, kind of in a sacred cocoon, an embrace of energy, Malchut rests in the center. And the whole purpose is rest and receive. Malchut integrates all of the sphero, not passively, but actively by expanding the silence, by expanding the rest. It's like a vibrating vessel that beckons to receive. And what I think is so unheard of, and we don't have so much space in our culture right now for rest because there's so much busyness and noise and focus on productivity and doing, we're missing the piece of listening. And rest is really about receiving, listening, allowing. And that's how the still small voice, the divine that speaks through us, is the only way we can hear it is if we give our space, ourself space to listen and receive. I think as a journey, as a facilitator in yoga, in meditation, I started off really feeling like I needed to teach a lot, guide a lot, bring in a lot of Torah and a lot of imagery and a lot of exciting, inspirational moments throughout the class. And as I've grown as a facilitator, I've noticed less is more and taking myself away so that people in my class can have more space to rest and listen and be in their own experience. And that's where the greatest healing comes from. And I've noticed that with the most talented facilitators are folks you don't even know are really there. They're like so subtle. They're channeling so much. They're holding the space so carefully and you don't even notice they're there because you're in your own experience so deeply. That is the highest level. And that is my my prayer whenever I'm holding space is to let people rest, receive, and be in silence. And that's why the Torah was given in the Midbar, a place, a desert, a wilderness of quietude and silence, because our sages say that we can only receive when we're in a place of hefker, ownerlessness. And that means being quiet enough to receive, releasing our attachments, our gripping, our expectations, and kind of becoming a midbar, becoming an ownerless expanse to receive divine wisdom.
Yes, that really speaks to my heart. And everything you said, it's like music to my ears. When you're talking about being the receiver, the central channel, and just expanding, it also reminds me of this Torah teaching that's very much connects Malchut to Shabbat. And it's, that Malchut is the seventh of the lower Sfirot, and Shabbat is the seventh day of the week, the day of rest. And when we rest at the end of a yoga practice, or really any time that we need a break or conscious rest, this is when we're creating that space for Shabbat, that Shabbat of the soul, and in that spaciousness of rest, allowing ourselves to take a break from all of the external social drama and trauma of life. So it's really just such a great way to open these channels for receiving that higher consciousness and raising our awareness and intuition. And with your eyes closed, you don't have any sensory input other than voice. And it's just this space to be with yourself and go through the layers of consciousness which parallel the architecture of the soul from nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yehidah, and to take it to this really beautiful space of malchut, this divine receiving of just your own connection to source. It's really just such a beautiful healing space where healing happens on a physical level, but also on an emotional level and spiritual level. So everything that you're sharing, it really fits so nicely with this practice.
Yeah, and every single breath, we really have an opportunity for that pause. Now, if you take a deep inhale and you pause at the top of your inhale, you're at the peak of receiving life force. And when you exhale and you pause at the bottom of the exhale, where you're in malchut, where you're empty, you're almost giving yourself back to your creator. It's the ultimate form of rest and surrender. So we have that Shabbat, the mini sacred pause within every breath.
Yes, yes. I know that we've been talking for a while already, and I just feel like our conversation can just keep going for a really, really long time. So, let me just ask you about your personal yoga and spiritual practice and where people can find you and what you're offering.
Hmm. Thank you. So, my personal practice for yoga, firstly, I've released expectation or kind of judgment on myself to have to do yoga every single day, as in a typical full flow from beginning to end, which is I used to have a very disciplined practice every single day. And now I'm much more compassionate to whether my yoga practice is a full hour or whether it is 5 minutes of me laying on the earth and listening to my heartbeat, to my breath. And I always need time in the day to ask the divine to show me what I need to know. So, what do I need to be in touch with today? And my biggest practice is listening and emptying. So, that is necessary for me. If I have time for a full flow, it's great. And what's really important is that I listen to the messages of the day coming through. And usually my meditation is not in stillness, but is movement from the inside out. So I'll start in seated, I'll close my eyes, I'll make my prayer. And usually my body moves itself, whether that's circles around my hips or stretching side to side or shaking or lifting. Every day it's different and my body shows me what it needs. So my personal practice is listening as a way to tend. Um, I do teach yoga series here in Boulder and also online. You can also find me on my Radiant Body Embodied Kabbalah course, which is 8 weeks through Tree of Life Healing. I also have a one-on-one option called Align for personal, spiritual, and embodiment work. If you want some deeper form of mentorship and coaching. And I always have new offerings. So you can keep in touch on my website at Authentic Roots, AWE, um, as like not authentic, but yeah, AWE, authenticroots.com. And you can also find me on Instagram at breathandsoul_Jenna. And I'm often hosting new moon and full moon ceremonies, both in Boulder and virtually. So yeah, however you would like to get in touch, I'm available and open to meeting you.
Amazing. And we'll have all the links, which you can find in the show notes as well.
Well, thank you, Ruthie. So honored. Thank you for bringing me on. I've been wanting to meet you for a while, and I'm so glad and trusting in divine timing that we're meeting finally.
Yes, same here. Thank you so much, Jenna. I really truly enjoyed our connection and our conversation, and I hope we can continue this connection. It's really, you have so much wisdom and such a beautiful story to share. So, thank you so much for coming on the show. If you enjoyed this conversation with Jenna Zadaka, I invite you to like, share with family and friends, subscribe to this podcast to help it grow, or leave feedback, whether online or offline. You're also welcome to join the Nale Yoga community on WhatsApp for the most recent updates on new podcast episodes and local events. Wishing you a wonderful rest of your day or night, wherever you are in the world, and I hope to meet you back here again soon. Be well.